And Amy, so in response to the carrier deal that was struck it was really between the state of Indiana and the carrier, with respect to the carrier facility in Indianapolis, so that 1,000 jobs did not get transferred to Mexico. The regime had a response to that. It was from the Dickensian named Josh Earnest, the White House spokesbeing. And he said this about Trump's great success last week, if you term it as success.
The president-elect has indicated that he deserves credit for that announcement. And I guess what I would observe is that if he is successful in doing that 804 more times, then he will meet the record of manufacturing jobs that were created in the United States while President Obama was in office. There were 805,000 manufacturing jobs that weren't just protected or saved, but actually created while President Obama was in office. So,
look at me over here. I'm going to top you, Trump.
Yeah, except smarmy D-bag Ernest using some fuzzy accounting when it comes to that 805,000. Turns out, actually, since Obama took office, I mean, you kind of cherry pick your starting point, but since Obama took office, there has been a net loss of manufacturing jobs. Net loss.
Then
of
how did he come up
jobs.
with 805,000 jobs?
In fact, even when President Obama made his promise in the 2012 campaign to create 1 million manufacturing jobs, which is a dumb thing for any politician to say, by the way. I love these politicians. I'm going to create X number of jobs. You know, like they are these mystics who really can turn some dials and pull some levers and create X amount of jobs. It doesn't work that way.
So when Donald Trump said he'd create 25 million jobs, he
no,
might be a little off.
No, well, nobody should put. You should just put in a target on. Maybe he'll create 40 million. Maybe he'll create 10. Maybe he'll create none. Depends what policies he chooses. But Bureau of Labor stats show that between the time Obama made that promise in 2012, in the 2012 campaign, and October of this year, the number of manufacturing jobs in the country rose by a little under 300,000 jobs. So, you know, it's all where you pick your starting point, but it has little to do with what the president has done or not done. I mean, other than the extent that he has blunted economic growth across the board, as we've seen kind of feebly inching out of the Great Recession. And for evidence of that, you look to the states and the disparate results that are happening at the state level. So you think manufacturing, you think Rust Belt, you think Illinois and our neighbors. And Illinois, just to give you a sense of what's happening here, and the importance of state policy and politics. Everybody vote, presidential, and he's going to create all these jobs, and he saves carrier. Actually, if you want to talk about job creation, you need to talk state and local. State and local. Manufacturing jobs created since the Great Recession, since the bottom of the Great Recession to this summer. Manufacturing jobs created in Wisconsin, 50,000. Indiana, 90,000. Ohio, 75,000. Michigan, 171,000.
Wow.
Illinois, 20,000. 20,000. We're the transportation center of the Midwest. We have the infrastructure. We're a substantially bigger, more diverse state than all of the other states mentioned. 171,000 jobs in Michigan, manufacturing jobs, since the depths of the Great Recession, with Detroit, the bankrupt Detroit right there in the center. 20,000 in Illinois. Almost nine times the number of Michigan versus Illinois. That has everything to do with state policy and politics. And that's where we need to look. Oh, by the way, interesting note, of the states mentioned, there's one state that has more government jobs than manufacturing jobs.
Oh, let me guess.
Go
Illinois.
ahead. That is correct.
Bing, bing, bing. Thank you.
Our Great Lakes neighbors all have more manufacturing jobs than government jobs. Illinois, 175,000 more government jobs than manufacturing jobs. Can someone remind me again, which is the wealth-producing sector? Is it government or is it manufacturing? And if it's the latter, then shouldn't we focus on economic policies that would expand manufacturing, if that's the wealth-creating sector, and not government? Well, the Illinois electorate said no. They said no on November 8th. They said, let's stay the course, more government jobs, more jobs fleeing to our Great Lakes neighbors, more families fleeing to our Great Lakes neighbors. That's what suburban Democrat voters in suburban Cook and the Collier County said on November 8th. So own it. Own it. You're a Democrat in suburban Cook County and the Collier counties. You said, I don't want manufacturing jobs here. I want government jobs here. That's what you said with your vote for the same old state legislators, with your vote to replace Comptroller Munger with another Madigan flunky. That's what you said. And for those who know neighbors and others in your social circles, your circles of influence in suburban Cook and the Colliers, make that point. Tell them thank you for continuing the outmigration of manufacturing jobs and productive families so that the political class can be financed and expanded. Because that's what you did by voting for the same old state legislators. That's what you did in the suburbs and suburban Cook County. Own it. And it's about time we got a little bit more aggressive with these individuals, and we had people who know better stand up and start shaming their neighbors who apparently don't. I mean it. Otherwise, we just continue this economic death spiral. So are you interested in the place in which you live, the place in which you've invested, the place where your kids go to school, or not? For more on this issue, we're happy to be joined by Steve Rauschenberger, former state senator, now the president of the Technology and Manufacturing Association. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Good morning. I can hear the passion cackle right through the telephone line.
Well, I mean, it's exasperating living in this state, particularly when you see how different it could be if you just chose a different policy course in our, with respect to our neighbors. And so Josh Earnest's point, where they've scaled the Democrat model nationally, seems to not be followed in the states that are flourishing and not be working in the state that's following their model here in Illinois.
Yeah, I think that really brightly paints the recent decision down in Springfield that the governor has indicated he's going to sign for Commonwealth Edison bailout. Exelon, a very profitable producer of electricity, owns Commonwealth Edison, the electric distribution utility for Northern Illinois, just achieved a legislative rate increase that's going to fall primarily on small to medium-sized businesses, in particular manufacturing, which are large users of electricity as an input. So not enough that we carry state policy, the pensions, high property taxes, but here's another rock to put on the back of producers in the state of Illinois.
And so that is something Technology and Manufacturing Association manufacturers are opposing because, these are it's a bit of an esoteric issue, the kind of energy policy and how this deal, particularly because it's kind of an umbrella deal with all kinds of goodies going in a lot of different directions, to try and understand it. Is this a good thing or a bad thing to bail out a couple of nuclear power plants? And you're suggesting it's a bad thing for manufacturers, thus it's a bad thing for Illinois.
Yeah, it's a bad thing for legislators to run down during a veto session and allow Commonwealth Edison to draft a bill that is in the interest of one company, or perhaps two if you add in the downstate utilities, at the expense of consumers and manufacturers. I mean, not only, you can cap the consumers at 25 cents a month is what the claim is, but those consumers work someplace. Many of them work in manufacturing or in businesses that support manufacturing. So if you raise the cost of electricity on the producers in your state, we lose more bids. Mm-hmm. The kind of bids my members win today are on the internet. They compete with Tennessee, they compete with Michigan, they compete with Taiwan, they compete with Eastern Europe. So when you raise an input cost for an Illinois manufacturer above what neighboring states pay, that only loses us more business in the state of Illinois and adds another reason for businesses as they decide to relocate or upgrade their plants to choose a different place to do business.
Hey, Steve, for those of us who don't know, what are the largest manufacturing companies in Illinois, and how have they been able to financially stay here?
Well, the largest manufacturers in Illinois are probably people like Caterpillar, John Deere, General Dynamics does a lot of manufacturing here. Ford Motor Company has plants. Chrysler, Fiat has plants. But the members of my association produce the input products that go into those companies' final assembled products. So we're kind of down the chain a couple of levels. That's where the strength of Illinois manufacturing has always been. It's not in the final assembly, which takes place in Detroit. We're a major producer of parts that go into automotive in the state of Illinois, and it's shipped for final assembly to Tennessee or to Michigan or Ohio.
So we're seeing potentially, if the governor signs that legislation you described, an increase in the cost of energy for manufacturers. And we're not seeing anything on the other side to bring Illinois in line with those Great Lakes neighbors I mentioned previously when it comes to things like workers' comp costs. This is kind of another esoteric issue, but it turns out to be a immensely important one in terms of manufacturers making expansion decisions, making location decisions, manufacturers being profitable.
And winning bids. I mean, the people the 30,000 employees that work for the members of the Technology and Manufacturing Association are job manufacturers. They do production runs for other manufacturers. So every time you raise the cost of an input, and electricity runs between 7 and 37% of cost of production for a lot of manufacturers. If you're a plastic injection molder, it's a third of the cost of your inputs. So you raise my electricity costs by 5, 6, 7%. That means those 4 bids that I won over the last year by 2 or 3 cents, I'm going to lose this time. So my guys are going to stay home. They're going to have a short week. Maybe we close the third shift. Maybe we have to close the plant eventually. I mean, pretending that you can raise these things in isolation or that you can load on the commercial manufacturers extra property taxes, extra costs of local government, the pension excesses of the state of Illinois, and then here's your Christmas gift from the legislature in a veto session without hearings and without seeing the bill they voted on. Here's an electricity increase.
Now, but also explain workers' comp, because, as I said, a lot of people don't have exposure to the system, hear the governor talking about it, but don't really understand what the impasse is between the governor and legislative leaders, the importance of the issue for the job creators we're discussing. So just explain how Illinois is different than our neighbors and how that drives hiring decisions and location decisions and investment decisions.
Well, workman's compensation is a medical insurance program that's supposed to help and deal with injuries of workers on the job. Other states have, each state has its own rules for what qualifies as a workman's compensation claim. If you break your ankle at the softball game, you go to the hospital, you're under your major medical or under the Medicaid program or under Obamacare or whatever. But if you break your ankle at work, you're under the workman's compensation insurance program at your company. Now, instead of being competitive like the Blue Cross Blue Shield has to be, or Aetna, or anybody else in the health insurance business, workman's compensation is a set of rules written by the legislature and then enshrined by the Department of Labor in the state of Illinois. So the costs to deal with injuries in the workman's compensation system are not only higher. The broken ankle in the softball game, let's say, costs $4,000. The broken ankle in the work comp system could cost $50,000.
Yeah, but why is the broken ankle in Illinois more in the workplace legitimate, where, hey, that's what workers' comp is there for? We want to make sure workers who are injured on the job get the medical care they need and back to work and all that. Why is it so much more expensive in Illinois than in Indiana or Wisconsin or Michigan?
Bad rules, bad regulations, and a bad system are why. We have a system that takes place mostly in the Thompson Center. It's a small group of lawyers on both sides that represent either the insurance company and the employer or the injured worker. Things are done before arbitrators instead of before doctors. Everybody in that system benefits from large settlements and delayed decisions and the worker being injured. So instead of a system that worries about how do we fix this guy's ankle or this lady's wrist and getting them back to work so they can have a productive life, this is a system that encourages delays, encourages a conflict situation, encourages bankruptcy for the injured worker in many cases. I mean, Illinois just has bad rules. Consequently, our premium health workman's compensation premiums cost roughly twice what it does in Indiana.
I want to get your take on the carrier deal and Trump's disposition on companies that are thinking about building a facility somewhere other than the United States.
Well, I think 1,000 jobs is wonderful. I think that Mike Pence and the state of Indiana did a good job in trying to engage with United Technologies, which I think is the parent of Carrier. But, the president's hyperbole about punishing people who leave the United States or punishing companies that make location decisions, I hope is just that, hyperbole. What I do think is refreshing is we have a president who cares about these things and made it clear that he cared about it. I think that's what everybody's excited about. He may not have the solutions yet, and I personally think it's a bad idea to do one-offs where you negotiate, whether it's with Commonwealth Edison or United Technologies and Carrier, to cut special deals to save jobs. It just encourages rent seekers or people to come to you with made-up conditions and problems. But the idea that the president cares, just like if you're in Aleppo, you care about Trump, just if you're in Indiana, you care about Trump, because here's a president who seems to have an interest in middle-class workers and manufacturing jobs and jobs in general.
All right. He is Steve Rauschenberger, president of the Technology and Manufacturing Association, former state senator from Elgin. Steve, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I love your show.
Thanks for coming on. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.